All right. Good morning, friends, and thank you for joining this webinar sponsored by TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. My name is Davey Gerhard, and I'm the Executive Director and Canon for Stewardship. Today, we're going to be talking about the economic halo effect of your church. It's a little bit different of a webinar. It's not so much meat and bones on how to run a campaign. It's more how do we talk about mission with our members and remind them of the impact that we have. And this is really important because our impact our ministries have on the neighborhood around us is one of the ways that we attract new members. It's also the way we help our members make their best gifts to the church. Hopefully they get as excited as we are about what we're doing. So we're going to be trying to understand the impact that we have around us. Our learning objectives today, we're going to start with a little chit chat about mission and remind us that it is why we are here. It's not just to build an institution called the church, it's to do work in the world. So we'll talk about mission. We're going to talk about the actual study on which this webinar is based. The economic halo effect is a study commissioned a few years ago by an organization called Partners for Sacred Places. We're going to be talking about that and looking at their results and applying it to our congregation, your congregation, perhaps. We're going to do a little Bible study, a little Saturday morning conversation about a mission-focused Bible passage and how we all participate in that. And then we're going to talk about how you get out there into the community and assess what's being done, how it's being received, and how you can bring it back and make a plan in your church. With that said, let's get rolling. Our Book of Common Prayer and hopefully plenty of other places in our traditions and liturgy remind us that we're here for mission. We're not just here to have open doors and have the lights on and meet, but we are here to do work, inspire ourselves to do that work, and remind ourselves that God has given us much to do. Jesus created an institution to help us do that, and our work is out in the world as much as it is in our hearts and in our congregations as well. So this is a little reminder about our own catechism from the back of the Book of Common Prayer. You might not flip to these back pages very often, but it's in there, and it reminds us what is the mission of the church, which is to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. So one of the ways we talk about doing that, of course, always is getting out there, doing the work, showing people our love, being good neighbors, supporting the work of our communities and the embeddedness of our congregations. How does the church pursue its mission? The Catechism asks us, and the answer prescribed is that we pray, worship, proclaim the gospel, and promote justice, peace, and love. These are ways that we embody the teachings of Christ and bring them out into the world and remind ourselves that that's why we are here. That's the work we've been given to do. And so that we all remember who the ministers of the church are, through whom does the church carry out its mission, the Catechism asks. And we are reminded that we are the ministers. We have clergy. Certainly, they play an important role, but through our baptism, through our membership, through our work and our passion and our own relationship with the church, we are also empowered to get out there and roll up our sleeves and do what we can to be the change in the world. So the church carries out its mission through the ministry of all of its members, each one of us doing our work in our way. I usually think about mission in two really broad categories, and these are so broad that they include everything, I think. But the more nuanced we are, the more practical we can be. But for sake of today's conversation, I want to just remind ourselves that we have an inward and an outward facing mission. Our inward mission of the church is to care for the body of Christ, to care for the people who assemble, who work in the church, who show up, and who are there. And we do this through a number of ways. Our pastoral care, and we promote this. Sometimes we have funds behind it, or dedicated staff members, or perhaps a team that's called together to be the pastoral care team. Some congregations do this with phone trees, back in the old days when we had phones, or do it through other means where people reach out to each other to share information or to rally the resources of the congregation. Our liturgy and our worship, these are opportunities to encounter the divine and find that contemplative, beautiful place, the place where our heart and our soul and our mind connect through our voice, through our action, through the Eucharist, perhaps, and other sacramental things that we do. Our Christian formation, this is a way that we feed the flock, that we remind ourselves of the work that we're supposed to do, and we equip the saints for all their ministries. So these are book studies, these are Sunday school, this is adult education and programs that we run, other things that deepen our connection with self and community and God. Christian formation is one of the essential parts of many of our church budgets and a lot of the work that goes into caring for the people who are a part of our church. Of course, we have things like, keeping the church up and building maintenance. Can always begin a conversation with anyone who's a member of any church and say, where's the leak in your congregation? And there is somewhere in your building, there's a leaky roof or some water getting in somewhere, reminding us that we always need to pay attention to our buildings, keep them up. There are parts of our budget, and that's part of our mission as well, to make certain that we care for, steward the buildings that have been built and given by past generations. They're ours now, and we want to pass them on to the future. But there are lots and lots and lots of other ways, support ministries, and other things that we do in our church to care for each other, which is why I've left it at the end there for you to fill in your own ideas on how the church cares for each other and remind ourselves that that too is answering the call to mission. We also have outward facing mission, and this is the work sometimes we talk about most because it's our chance to be visible in the community. It's where a lot of our efforts go into talking about how we impact or serve our neighbors. And so a lot of our work is opening ourselves up. The study today that we're going to talk about talks a lot about the people who come into our church who may or may not be members throughout the week. So if we do recovery programs or 12-step programs, other community groups like scouting or other service agencies, opportunities, things like that, we often give them very low cost or free rental space to meet on a Tuesday night or a Thursday morning or whatever. This is a part of our mission and our outreach. We have things that we call outreach opportunities, and maybe that's joining a local nonprofit or school in their work. Maybe it is a direct ministry that our church sponsors, like a food pantry or a clothing closet or a cleanup project or a tutoring program, any number of things that we might do that are funded from our own budget that we offer as a service to our community. It's how we engage as people, as civic people in our society. So do we go to city council meetings and school board meetings and county council meetings? Do we pay attention to the life around us? And do we represent our values and our families and our church when we go to those sorts of meetings? How do we engage the world around us and remind them that there's a voice that we have and a perspective that we share, and that's a really important part of our outreach and ministry as well. And maybe there are then things that are really cool in your neighborhood that are specific, like a children's fair every year or a rummage sale. I know that for example, my congregation, the whole street has a garage sale, a rummage sale on the Saturday before Mother's Day each year. And everyone turns out, the whole city seems to turn out for this. And it's a place where we sell things that people bring us, but we also are the only public bathrooms on the block that people can access. And we have water and hot dogs and snacks for people as they're walking around. It's an opportunity to be visible. So how you engage in your neighborhood visibility and how you share your resources with your neighbors, this is the mission of our church and the work that we do. This is why we are here, and this is how our greater communities interface with us and get to know us. Let's talk a little bit now about how we are perceived and how our congregations interact with our communities. And I want to specifically talk about the study that Partners for Sacred Places did. They looked at 3 cities in 3 metropolitan areas of the United States, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Fort Worth, and they picked 90 faith-based institutions to study in this work, churches, temples, and mosques. And what they asked, they had a deep dive of interviews and surveys, both of members and of constituents, people who lived in the neighborhood, people who used the church for other reasons. It was a very comprehensive, really deep study, and they gathered a ton of data. The whole idea behind this was that they wanted to really understand what value your church has in your community and how it's perceived and how you can then leverage that as a congregation into doing yet more work, or perhaps recruiting more members or showing the world what you're doing. The 2 biggest things that this study found is that as many as 87% of the people who come into your church each week are not members. So they could be coming for support or 12-step groups, other nonprofit or learning or education opportunities. If your church rents out its space to a preschool or some sort of other educational offering, or perhaps you rent space to nonprofits to do their work. So people coming in and out your doors in many of the congregations that were interviewed in this study can be as up to 87% of people who aren't actually members who are coming in. It's 87% of people to whom you might minister in other ways, or perhaps start to reach out to in some way to remind them that your resource, your building, the people that are there, the history that you have, the way you engage is something that might be appealing to them. The other thing that this study found, and kind of the most astounding part, is that on average, a congregation puts $1.7 million of economic service and output into its community annually. This is a big number, and it's meant to shock us and remind us that just by being there on the block that you're on, in the place that you are, offering the services that you do, you are an economic engine for your neighborhood, for your community. And this is an average number, right? So this takes into account congregations that do huge amounts of ministry and offer lots and lots of benefit to their neighbors, and more modest congregations that do what they can to serve themselves and their neighbors appropriately. So this average number is a big one for a really big reason, because there aren't a lot of community spaces out there. Our churches have lots of land and buildings and assets that can be mobilized and used for these kinds of resources, and that this is an important reminder that whether it is having a light on at night that makes your block safer and property values in your home, in your neighbors' houses go up, that's a thing that happens. Maybe you have a parking lot that your neighborhood uses for overflow parking and you permit that. Or I learned to drive in a church parking lot. My dad would take me around on a Saturday afternoon. You know, who knows how your space is used. Maybe you have a playground, maybe you have a field, maybe people use that space throughout the week and find actual value in it as neighbors, as people who live near you. But then there's all the other stuff, and we're going to walk through it in ways that your church has a real economic impact on your community. By showing that we have economic impact on our community, we remind ourselves that there's a lot of value in supporting church. So this is a stewardship question. There's a lot of value in being members of church because it's deeply connected in the community. And there's a lot of reason to reach out with pride in our community and say, we're here. We're not going anywhere. We're doing really important things. We want you to know about it. One of the first things the study looked at, and we're going to go through a few slides here that look right at their results and talk about them a little bit. So in this study of 90 congregations, 3.6 million people visited a year to these 90 congregations. And they were broken down in the 4 areas that you see there. People who came for community-based programs, education opportunities. This includes schools and preschools. So if churches have schools or preschools attached to them, that was factored in, but also other kinds of extra educational opportunities like tutoring programs or reading programs or literacy programs, things like that. 11% coming for worship. So that might surprise us. Again, we're looking at that 87% of people who come to your church might not be members. So out of 3.6 million visits, 11% of them were coming for actual worship and liturgy and the opportunities that you think your church is there for all the time, but really it's only one of the many things that your church does. And then special events is the final category. That's like recitals or seminars or concerts that you might have. If you do a monthly organ concert or you let nonprofits use your space to practice singing in or give their quarterly concert or whatever. Those kinds of special events. Maybe you have a speaker series or some sort of seminar that you run, or maybe it's giving local nonprofits a place to talk about their work, whatever. Special events is the smallest, but a significant part of the reason why people visited these 90 congregations. Let's remember, just as we're walking through these numbers, yes, these are 90 congregations that probably aren't yours, but you are like them. They didn't pick them because they were big or tiny, struggling or successful. It was a really uniform look across different kinds of congregations, urban and suburban and rural. Well, not rural because they were all in metropolitan areas, but taking a look at how congregations in places that could be yours, whether or not they were a part of this study. Well, so now let's look at the actual economic halo per congregation. Again, these are average numbers, but to see how that actually works out. The study broke down our its projections into 3 different areas. Education, so the schools and aforementioned scholastic programs or programming. Direct spending, so that might be your actual funded ministry out in the community, food pantries, things like that. And then things that they called catalytic. So the things that bring members or people to you that may or may not be funded out of your budget or a direct part of the education or service that you provide, other things that you do. So, and in that, they had the safety net. So, it creates programs perhaps that your community relies on, and that adds value to it. We're going to talk about, you'll see sort of some non-revenue halo effects and catalytic effects as we dig down into this study a little bit more and see what they're really talking about there. And then things that attract people to the community. So that magnetic effect. Things that if you turned them into more ministry, or if you did some outreach to those people about the services, the liturgy, the community support that you have, might be good opportunities to recruit new members or bring new people into an awareness of your congregation. Education, as I said, talks about daycare, preschool, and actual K through 12 education. Direct spending could be on your programs, but also you employ people, you spend money with local contractors and suppliers, vendors. That adds money into your community, and you have program that might buy supplies or offer things. So there's direct spending that happens in congregations. And then again, the magnet effect. What do your visitors to your church spend in the neighborhood around them? Do they pick up lunch? Do they drop off their dry cleaning at local businesses? And then what's the value of volunteer time? That invisible safety net. And how do we quantify that? How do we quantify the fact that people have a place to be and that gives them some safety or some place to enact their own or discover their own ministry? Let's look more deeply at these categories. Direct spending is about the people you hire. So you're actually paying taxes into the system. You're giving people a living wage so that they're able to engage in the economy of their neighborhood, of your neighborhood, and you provide jobs. You're a job provider. You also keep your building up, maybe lawn maintenance, maybe painting, maybe contracting work, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, the things that your church needs routinely or for capital work. That spends money in your community. So coming right out of your budget and going right into community spending, supplying economic engines for other companies and other organizations, that adds value in your community overall. So your church contributes to the sustainability of your town or your community. That's a big selling point. Something you can say about your church. We participate and we contribute to the sustainability of our town. The catalytic impact. I love this. It's actually a map of the businesses that are around Edgewater Presbyterian Church. I think this is in the Chicago area. And you know, when people come to this church for services, dropping their kids off at daycare, uh, picking someone up from an appointment or something like that, what are the other businesses in the neighborhood that they patronize? Do they do banking at the local branch? Do they drop off their dry cleaning at a place that they might not otherwise, maybe it's not close to where they live, but it's close to their church and it's convenient. They're in the car anyway. Do they do shopping? Do they pick up lunch or dinner for their family? Do they participate in some other way in local businesses? So you can do this too. Take a look at the businesses around your church. Take a look at where people are going and maybe even ask them. So if you have a daycare, you might have some way of reaching out to the people who show up and say, do you participate? Do you do anything on the street, on the commercial street that's near us? Do you go to those businesses? If so, why or how often or when? And start to build your own understanding of how your congregation is supplying an economic boost to the neighborhood around you. Your church has an economic impact on your neighboring businesses. They rely on you. Now, this is also a good place to go to those businesses from time to time and ask for small community grants for programs you might do. If you do any sort of like concerts or recitals, ask them to be a sponsor and put an ad in the recital bulletin or something like that, small ways. They might not have thousands and thousands of dollars to give away, but if you say to them, our members or our constituents drive this much business to you, what could you do for us? A small grant of $500 a year from several local businesses is enough to do some small programming at your congregation and add to your revenue stream and build sustainable relationships down the road. So this takes a little effort and thought, but look at what it could do for your congregation if you took that step out and walked around and learned where your members and where your community beneficiaries shop, eat, do their business. The catalytic impacts of church. So you might provide actual safety, social safety net programs that your county depends on, your city might really need, that the government isn't providing or that other nonprofits aren't providing. Things that you can do that really benefit your church and your neighbors. So this is things like food banks and soup kitchens, meal programs, sandwich handouts, things like that you do that people who are in need rely on for nutrition, for stability. Maybe you open your church up in the winter. Many churches do winter shelter where, they rotate among churches and you can go and warm up, or in the summer you can cool off. Cooling centers are really important as well. If you have functioning air conditioning and a tall, glass of lemonade to help people cool off on a hot day. These are services that are essential safety net services that your churches could provide. And again, this study looked at about 13% of your congregation members. In this study, congregation members only made up 13% of these, and 87% were made up by non-community members, people who are coming from outside the congregation. Your church provides life-giving service to your community, not something to hang a program or a stewardship campaign on. We are actually helping people thrive and live. People depend on our ministry in our neighborhood. That's something to feel good about, not something to talk about and advertise when you're talking about your stewardship campaigns and your pledge drives. The other sorts of things that are catalytic impacts into our congregation and into our community, what kind of green space or recreation space? Do you have a playground? Do you have a basketball net? Do you have a field that kids can kick a ball around, whether it has soccer lines or not? Is it a place where people can ride their bikes or sit? Do you have a bench? A congregation here in the Diocese of California is on a popular bike route, with like signs around the town. This is a bike route, and they just happen to be on it. And so they put out a couple of benches. And on Saturdays, when people are biking, they have like a cooler of like water. And so people can refill their water bottles, sit on the bench, and it becomes this place where like neighbors gather and chill out for a little bit and then continue on their bike ride. Well, so that costs them very little. And they have this place now where people are, sitting in their churchyard on a Saturday or on a Thursday afternoon on a warm day and talking with each other and being there. Whenever you have people coming into your church, it shows vitality, vibrance. People want to participate in it. They see that there's life there. And so, when you do these things and there are people who are there at non-service times, so on a Tuesday morning or a Wednesday afternoon, and it's not like a church service, people are like, oh, there's something happening at this church all the time. This must be a happening place. There must be people supporting it. These are things people pay attention to when they're thinking about that church down the street and my own spiritual needs or my family's spiritual needs, or remember that place that seems to have a lot of life in it? You never know what seed gets planted when you do these things. So your church provides a chance to play and enjoy the community that you live in. The study also looked at a number of non-monetized halos. And so a lot of congregations start businesses or nonprofits. These are big undertakings, but they usually start as simple ministries. In the Diocese of California, for example, we have about 20 chartered nonprofits that over the last 175 years were started in church parish halls as a program and then turned into a thing, and over time became their own nonprofit organization. They still have a relationship with the diocese, but they're actually now they have their own boards of directors, their own fundraising, their own program staff, right? So churches start businesses. And so in this study of the 90 congregations interviewed, many could attribute a new business venture in their past history. These include things like I've mentioned, food pantries or nonprofits, maybe homeless services providers or adult daycare programs, things like that. But they also include advocacy or social work, or there are congregations that have very deep pockets that have started credit unions or business incubators. All Saints in Pasadena, California has a business incubator unit, and they give like seed money to people who have a good idea and give them the chance to start a little entrepreneurial business. And if that works out, it does. And if it doesn't, well, it was a chance that they took. This is something that you never know how it's going to impact. Your church provides new opportunities, creativity for people in your community. And there are also great things that you may or may not be able to track over time that your church does or has influenced or impacted people. And this part of the study I felt perhaps most emotional about. If I think about how our churches help people who are facing mental health crises or real other crises that are happening in their lives, if it's just walking through it with them or being a safe place to be alone with their thoughts or meet with others who are going through it. So these are things that the church may never get any money for, or the community may not get an actual monetized benefit from, but these are lives saved. And if you think about this, suicide prevention lines or people who maybe volunteer to do a Saturday suicide helpline or something like that. Your church is participating in saving lives. Maybe you have a program where you help people find full-time employment or do resume writing workshops or things like that. Those people may never come back and say, I found a job and now I can feed my family, but maybe that's what happened to them. So in the 90 programs or the 90 congregations that were a part of this study, look at some of these amazing numbers that are reached by people, over time. This is a 1-year study. And so in this year, what happened in these 90 congregations that they could point to? A lot of our congregations are involved in recovery ministries. And so you've got, 2,000 people who are being provided with recovery treatment, teaching pro teaching social values to our children through our godly play or Sunday school programs, through our confirmation classes, by showing up in church. You're passing it along to a future generation. These are our values, and this is how we engage in the world. A lot of congregations are doing work in immigration and advocacy, refugee ministry, things like that. And so those are individuals that are helped. They may never be able to come back and say, this is what the church did for me, or this is how it happened. They might just always just or might only be a number on a checklist of people who attended a program, but in fact, these represent real change in people's lives, and churches are a part of that. We who work in church, who are participants of church, members, and who give and donate our time and our talent and treasure, often forget that a lot of people's lives are saved or changed in church. And I think we lose sight of that sometimes because we're involved in the day-to-day. We're involved in running our programs or our congregations, and we forget sometimes the real impact that we have on people and a chance to impact and influence our congregations or our members of our community. I feel a little emotional when I talk about that because it's where the rubber meets the road in church. We're changing lives. We are being the change that we need in our society. So what do we do with this? Okay, so your church wasn't a part of this study, but there were things in this study that you can test through surveys, through conversations, by having a checklist for the kinds of programs you run. Again, some of these programs you don't want to collect too much information. The people might be of a place or a moment where they don't need to or want to share too much information about who they are. But this many people showed up for this service or help or whatever is something you can track. And all of that, however you can track that data, learn about the habits of the people who are your members and the people who use your church as a resource, the more you can then turn this into ministry opportunity and leverage that in your stewardship, in your membership drives, in acquiring and connecting with new members. So what's the story you will tell about your own congregation's economic halo? What does it say to the local businesses? And how can you leverage that? We talked about, will you advertise in our Sunday recital bulletin? Will you give us a small grant to run this program? Will you provide, a lot of them will provide in-kind things if they can't provide actual money. So we're making sandwiches next Thursday. Will you provide the bread or the lunch meat or whatever, or give us a big discount on it? Ask and remind them that people who come to your church shop in their store and that there's a relationship there. What does it say to your local civic institutions, school boards, county supervisors, city hall, when your congregation shows up or members of your congregation show up to listen and learn and participate in the civic dialogue that's happening in your community, and bringing the values of your church to those sorts of meetings? It says, this is a place to pay attention to. This is a place that generates people who have values and want to share it, and also people who are deeply connected in the community, right? So often politicians pay attention to money. And so when you can remind them that your congregation has this kind of a financial impact, economic impact on your community, or does this kind of work in its service and provides this much value, that's the calculus that a lot of business people or politicians use. In church, we use different metrics. We talk about mission and ministry and membership, and that's really important too. So find the way that people need to connect and try to remind people why they should be paying attention to your church and the work that you do. What does it tell your own members about how their gifts have impact in the world? When you can go back out and say, look at what we're doing, lives saved, lives changed, service provided, and you have numbers behind it, and you have a story to tell. What does it tell, and how does it make members feel that the time, talent, and treasure that they share really has change and impact in your community? Pay attention to that and learn how to talk about that and tell the story of that. What opportunities for new ministries might you find and discover as you learn what your neighborhood and your neighbors need and how they're responding to what's already happening in your community? And that's what we're going to start to talk about next as we move from studying who comes and why to what then we can do about it and what we can learn. But before that, let's have a little Bible study. I would love for someone who's not me to volunteer to read these 6 verses from First Corinthians. And then we'll do a little short Bible study. Who's feeling motivated to read? Please come off mute and give us your voice. Jennifer, I see you come off mute. Welcome.
Okay. Hi, thanks. So a reading from Corinthians, First Corinthians, and I need to get this heart thing off my, okay. For when one says, I follow Paul, and another, I follow Apollos, are you not mere human beings? What, after all, is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants through whom you come to believe as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose. They will each be rewarded according to their own labor. For we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field by building, and I need to move you. I'm not great at Zoom. If I put the negative on there, can I get rid of you for a minute, David?
I think so. I think
Okay.
so. Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't want to cut myself out. Okay. So I'm going to just backtrack a little bit. For we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one who already laid, which is Jesus Christ. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Yes.
Jennifer, thank you for that. And
Welcome.
what I hope that we can spend a couple minutes doing before we move into lessons and next steps is taking a look at this particular verse. We don't get it very often. It doesn't come up too often in our lectionary cycle, but I wonder what you hear in it. And if there's a word or a phrase that jumps out at you, what's something that speaks to you from this passage? Just, you don't have to be very formal about it. Come off mute and shout it out into the room. I see you, Amy.
What speaks to me is the planting of the seed, but God making it grow. And I think sometimes we forget that part when we're doing our outreach or inreach, that it's all about us and not acknowledging and thinking about the fact that God is really making this grow.
Right. Other observations? Other words that jump off the screen at you?
I see the co-workers in God's service. We're meant to spread the word of Jesus, not only in our own congregation, but throughout the community, in people we meet.
Yeah. Mm. I really love that. Amy, I love what you pointed out, and Stephen, I love what you just did. Like, we're co-workers. I think that that's such an important concept. None of us does this alone. We do it with God, but there's also a role for us. God needs us to do this work. So we can't just say, you do it. But there's a real reminder there that we do this together. And that, whether it's planting or sowing or harvesting or watering, it's all this process that we do together. I love that idea. I also love that it has something to say about our members and our community. Jennifer, I cut you off.
And it might not be appropriate here, but it was making me think with the last part of what you were saying is that I'm new to stewardship, and I don't think necessarily people know who I am or what we're all about. And I was thinking it would be so neat to be able to write, 40 thank you cards to people saying, thanks for being God's co-worker and helping with the food pantry, and just a little thank you note to the people who are contributing and letting them know that's part of stewardship. That was my thought there.
Well, you might be new to stewardship, Jennifer, but you got the first and most important concept down, Pat, which is to thank people and to remind them that you've done something by sharing yourself, your time, talent, and treasure. It's noticed, it has an impact. We are grateful. And so I don't see my friend Charles from Maryland on this call today, but he would remind us, were he here, that the 6 most important words in stewardship are thank you, thank you, thank you. And Amy, you've got something to say.
Yeah, I meet with Charles every, I don't know, I'm still a part of his lunch brigade. So, yep. And I mentioned that in my parish, the 6 most important words in stewardship are thank you, thank you, thank you. And don't I hear it back to me all the time. But Jennifer, I did an Excel spreadsheet of every member in our parish and what they specifically do for outreach or inreach or any other service they do outside of money that they give. And it's a pretty large parish. So I end up writing about 240 thank you notes, but I have a general thank you message, and then I go through the Excel spreadsheet and add thank you for being part of pastoral care and making lunches for Paul's Place. And I can only really do that once a year. But I do it at the second quarter. But those individual thank you notes, that's new for this church, has made a tremendous difference. I write individual thank you notes for stewardship when people pledge, but I think you hit the nail on the head by making it individual so that people get a note handwritten that thanks them for exactly what they're doing. I think is so important.
Amy, thank you for that reminder. And making it personal, yeah, we have to thank people, and generally thanking them from the chancel steps, from a thank you note that's auto-generated. Those are all great, but then taking that extra moment to do something personal, right? Even if it's writing on the bottom of the standard thank you note, I appreciate the way you sing in the choir. Thank you for being such an excellent baker. I love the way you do this ministry, or whatever. Those are really, really important moments. But Amy, I want to remind you that 240 is a lot of notes to write, and you might recruit some note writers to help you with that, because it's a ministry that other people could take your spreadsheet and divide it up and help you. Maybe, it's something you do on your own, or maybe it's something that you call people together and have a pot of tea and do this work as a ministry.
I had a helper last year, and then she realized how much work it was, and I don't have her anymore.
She got a cramp in her hand and she was like, I'm done. It's hard to write that many notes, and it's so important. So maybe find some more ministry partners to help you, because as you said, 240 is a lot. But congratulations on having 240 thank you notes to write, because that is a beautiful thing in your ministry. I love that. Kathy put into the chat while we were talking about things in the reading that stuck out to us, that what reminded her was that she plays a small part, but and then she's an important coworker, right? There's no job too small. There's no job that is ignored, that isn't needed. And no matter our role, some of us take large roles, outsized perhaps, some of us take very small ones. Each one of them is appropriate and has impact and is needed in order to make the whole thing function, to serve more people, to benefit our community, to do God's work in the world. Well, thank you for that. And the next time this comes up in the lectionary, I hope you remember this conversation. And because we need to remember that all that we have been given, the land, the building, the watering, the tools, the thanking, the spreadsheet, it all comes from God. And that we're here to facilitate and steward those gifts and move them forward into the next part of their lives. And that is about our church and our ministry. So let's take the lessons from the study that we've looked at and the Bible study that we just had and start to learn how we can do this work in our community to find more opportunity to hone our ministries or maybe discover new ones and make a plan. Jesus sent us out in twos to do the work of observing and participating in towns 2 by 2, and did that work to help us develop, I think, a model for ministry and how we go into a community and say, what are the needs here? Who needs saving? Who needs help? And you know, we're not perhaps talking about salvation in terms of spiritual life, but we're talking about how can we help you? How can we build? How can we support the work that you're doing? And what does that mean? So as we move into this model, I have a couple of ideas. Let's divide ourselves up on a Saturday or over a month or something like that, and take some walks or some drives around our parish. Whatever that means, if that's your town, if that's a few blocks, pay attention. Draw a map of the place that you're going. What are the main streets, the commercial streets, the residential streets? Where are there schools and parks and businesses? Have some conversations with people that you meet. If you have a buddy with you and you're walking, it doesn't feel so awkward to maybe, you know, strike up a conversation with someone who's in a coffee shop at the table next to you, or at a bus stop, or in a park sitting on a bench. Have a conversation, and I'm going to have a couple of questions that you can ask easily that aren't too invasive or weird, but that get us some information about what we're doing. Go to the other places that are community hubs in your neighborhood. So if there's a farmer's market, or if your library has a reading day and people are gathering, or there's a book sale or a trunk sale or something like that, show up and just meet people as they're browsing a flea market and ask them questions about who they are and what they're doing. Again, you're not like carrying a notebook and being all weird about it. You're just gathering anecdotes. Learn who we are. I'm a part of your community too. You know, why are you looking at this table full of doorknobs? Are you redoing your house? You know, like, you know, great questions to ask people and begin learning information about who's there and why they're there. The tool we use in church to do this kind of work is called appreciative inquiry. And what it means is that we take a look at what we have rather than what we don't have. It's asset-based. And so we assume a positive stance when we go out and have a conversation. We're not saying what's going wrong in your life and what are you angry about, or you know, we can have conversations about like what's on your heart or where's your pain, depending on, you know, the pastoral place that our conversations go. But ultimately, what we begin with is, what are you excited about? Or what's the positive thing that's happening here? Or What's working well? What's good? What's exciting? What's giving you energy? It's solutions based and it's inclusive, and it doesn't, like any brainstorming sort of thing, it doesn't, you don't say no. Oh, we tried that. No, thank you, and walk on. You just take it in, listen to what people are saying, and move through that. So there are some great questions that you can ask in a sort of community needs assessment process. And so you might ask questions like, you know, what's it like living here? What are the schools like? What are the parks like? What does it feel like walking down the street? Do you feel safe? Do you feel like you see people who are like you? Are you a part of the community, or do you just kind of like come home and make dinner and sleep and leave the next morning for work? Like, what's your relationship? No bad answer. Just tell me, what's it like living here? What's your involvement? Do you go to church or temple or mosque? Do you participate in any sort of um, community religion or service in your community? What do you do with that? Is that a part of who you are? Do you know anything about us? Do you know about, our church down the street? You ever driven by it? Have you ever seen it? Have you ever walked into it? I'm a member there, just chit-chatting with you. Um, or maybe you know something about it. Maybe you used to go there, or you know someone who goes there, your neighbor goes there. Asking some questions about the community itself too, like maybe you haven't been born and raised in that town. And so like, what was it like living here for 3 decades? What have you noticed change? What's the history of this community? Who's been here? Who's not here anymore? Some questions like that. Is there a statue or a memorial or a park named after some figure that you don't know? Who are the people who are important in this place and why? Maybe, talk about that. Ask questions about that. And learn a little bit about the history and the people who have lived there and why the town or community at some point felt them important enough to name something after them, a street, a park, a statue, a memorial, or whatever. And how's the area changed? This is a great question to ask because a lot of people who have lived in a place for a while will happily tell you about their favorite store that's no longer there, or the fact that they love where things are going, or that there are more flowers on the streets than there used to be, and that feels good, or the schools have improved, whatever. Hear about what's going well, and you can, with your tone, encourage those positive things. When you hear something negative, you don't throw it away. You say, oh yeah, I hear that too. Or, you don't dismiss it, you just take it in, but try to keep it positive. Try to keep it mission focused, moving forward. These questions are open-ended. They're designed to begin. You don't have to ask all of them. You ask one of them or find your own way in. What this does, what an effort like this does, whether it's your whole parish engaging in this, or a few of you on a couple of Saturdays doing this work together, it just gives you data about who's in your community and what you need and what they need. You also want to identify the assets that are around you. And so that takes into account medical facilities or nonprofits that are doing work. So if you see that there are a lot of daycares, or there aren't many homeless services, but there seem to be a lot of homeless people, or there's a library that looks like it's pretty active and engaged, just write that on your note or make a star on your map or whatever. This is a place that's doing something important. What kinds of housing are involved in your community, either in your parish boundary, if you draw a line around your parish, or in your town, or whatever you consider your service area to be. Um, you know, is it single family homes? Is this condominiums? Is it a mix? Is there public housing? you know, what sorts of housing is available and list it all. There's a high rise, there's a senior care center, there's a lot of single family homes. We have a row of townhomes, whatever it is. Pay attention to that. And let people, you know, that's just data into your mix. What are the other churches or civic organizations that exist? Is there a Lions Club or a Kiwanis or an Elks Lodge? Is there an active VFW post? What's happening in your town that engages? Are there scout troops? Are there other service organizations that meet regularly, whether they meet in your church or not? And what are the other religious institutions that are around you? You know, we've got a lot of, you know, we have 3 Catholic churches in our town and only 1 Episcopal church and a couple Methodists around here. You know, who's missing, who isn't here? What are we looking at? Pay attention. What kind of access do you have? Is there a place, is it easy to get to from the city if you're in a suburb? Or is there public transit, bus lines or subway or things like that? Are there grocery stores and shopping opportunities that aren't, you know, that aren't expensive, or that everything's expensive right now, but that, you know, are at the moderate price level, places where families can really have access? Are there green spaces? Mark those out on your map as well. Mark out all the parks, all the playgrounds, and note what, you know, what hours are they open? Is this only for kids and families? Is this for dogs and people? Like who comes here and who doesn't come here? Know those sorts of pieces of information. These are all things to go on an asset map. If you've never been to the Episcopal Asset Map, you can find it at episcopalchurch.org. And you go there and you eventually find the asset map. I will put a link in the newsletter that I send out after this. It is a collection of every congregation that has chosen to share what it's doing in the community and what assets it provides the community. So if it's a food program or a daycare or a shelter or something like that, you can find it nationally. It's a really great tool, and your church should be updating it at least once a year when you do your parochial report, sending in, you know, what ministries are you doing so that it can be put on the Episcopal asset map. You can create your own asset map as well. And what's in our neighborhood, you know, if it's something simple like a map and some push pins, if it's drawing on, you know, or you create your own map, whatever. Do some asset mapping. What you want to look for are the assets, the patterns, and then what's missing. So if you have a lot of people with strollers on your sidewalks, but you don't see a lot of daycare centers and people are having to drive to daycare, that's a little note to say maybe our congregation should be involved in daycare. If you see a lot of seniors, or there's a senior housing program near you and your church doesn't have an activity for seniors to do that anyone can participate in, whether it's a lecture series or a book study or a recital or a cooling center or an afternoon tea or whatever you do. Maybe that's a little something to put into your thinking cap and say, maybe this is something that our church could be engaged in. Look for assets, patterns, and needs. Take it all back. Whoever in your church is looking at this, get together and compare your trips out into the community and gather your asset maps, put them in one place, compile your data. There are this many schools. We noticed 100 people in the farmer's market, but there were only 10 parking spots. You know, our church is only a block from it. Maybe we could open up our parking lot for people who want to go to the farmer's market. Wow, that's a great thing. People will then have a positive association with your church as a place that provided parking. You know, like, what can we do? You never know what piece of your co-working with God is going to be the thing, the seed that matures and grows into something interesting. And if it's easy to do, all the better. If it takes some resources, find a way or map that out. That's a conversation with vestry and finance to say, what should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? So know what's missing. Are there no easy grocery stores? Maybe you have food insecurity in your neighborhood. Maybe that's something for you all to pay attention to, a possible ministry idea. If there are no playgrounds, but your church happens to have one, can you make it open? Does your insurance allow that? What do you need to do to allow people into that space? What services are there too many of? We have too many daycares. I noticed that some of them are missing. In my neighborhood, there are like 4 karate taekwondo schools. Like, are there enough kids interested in karate and taekwondo? Maybe there are, but there seem to be a lot of them. That's not something you need to do in your church, perhaps, if there are that many in your community. So pay attention to where things are saturated, and you don't need to put that on your list. And then how connected are you? Is it easy for people? If you offer this service, can people get to it? Can people who don't live in your zip code or in your neighborhood, who don't have access to a car, or if they do have access to a car, there's parking for them, can people get to the thing that you're doing? And the people who need to be getting to it, are they able to get to it? So if the folks who need your service are mostly riding public transit, but the bus stop is far away, or there isn't one, you can talk to the city about bus routes. This is not a closed conversation. If you demonstrate need, I have a congregation down in the southern part of our diocese that appealed to the county to put in a bus stop across the street from their church, so that people, not only for the church, but also for the daycare center that they run, and they have sort of a migrant farming clinic that they run, people can get to it. And the county, it didn't take much. It took county bureaucracy, but eventually a bus stop got put in. Wow, that's amazing. And now people can access this ministry that the church is providing. So you never know where you go and how you find this information and how you can get your civic organizations, especially if you invest a little bit in the relationship with them, how you can get them to pay attention to you. Again, this is where doing some of that work on understanding who's coming into your church and the economic output you're putting into the community. Politicians listen to that. They listen to voters and they listen to money. So pay attention. And then if you say, I need a bus stop over here, how can we talk about this? Maybe you just won't get shoved off the desk. Someone will sit down and listen to you. Listen to how cynical I am about bureaucracy. Then you've got to implement and prioritize these things. So what reasonably can we do in our church to address these needs? Well, we can't build a new building right now, but we can do this. Is there a role for us? Is the community behind us? Everybody's excited about this idea. There's energy. Well, then maybe we can get the vestry to help us think this through, the clergy, what do we want? But if there's no interest in the congregation for this, whether it's a need or not, if there's no interest, there's not going to be people who want to work in this ministry. Know that. We need to know our members. Might be the best idea, but if we can't get people to understand it or buy into it, and we can't persuade them, then that's a ministry we shouldn't engage right now, because we don't want to start something that's already in a deficit. So some initiatives will be easy. Some won't take much startup funding, or it's a clear role. It won't take much many resources to do. Maybe you need to look at how many of these ideas you can do and put them on a calendar. We can do this one this year, And in 2 years, we can talk about this one. Maybe if the need changes in the neighborhood, we can reprioritize this. But we probably can't start all of our new ideas at once, stagger them out. And are there ministries that might need to sunset in order to accommodate new ministries? You know, we used to have a lot of people who did this or needed this, but they're not here anymore, or they've moved or whatever, but we're still doing this ministry. Maybe it's time to free up the people resources or the financial resources, the space use resources that program takes and allocate it towards something new that is needed or wanted. These are deep, deep conversations to have in your congregation, with your leadership, with your membership. I'm not pretending that they are easy, but these are beautiful opportunities to remind people that we're here to do ministry and that we should be changing and thinking about our ministry all the time. And then be smart about it. What can we really implement? What can we fund? What can we do well? What do we need to partner with other people for? Because maybe we can't do that piece of work, but we know who can. So we partner with others that can provide that service. You get it. You get where I'm going with this. And that ends what I wanted to say about the economic halo effect and our impact. I wanted to remind you before I open it up to general questions that the TENS materials are ready and available on your website for our annual pledge campaign this year. Our theme is about telling your story. And this goes back to the great work that we were talking about at the beginning of this session in what is the role of your community? What great things are you doing? What impact are you having? Collect those stories. Tell Out My Soul is a paraphrase of the Magnificat, Mary's song, when she is so excited, thrilled about what's happening and what she's just been told, that she's like bursting forward and sharing this information with the world. What is burning inside you? What is your story of engagement? What has God planted within you that you want to share with the world and talk about? News that you can't wait to share? That's what our materials for the 2025-26 year pledge campaign is about. And how can we encourage storytelling with our congregations and with our people. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring us back into our big group and ask you what questions you might have about what we covered today, what things you might want to learn more about, any experiences you've had in doing community canvassing or ministry identification. I'm going to stop talking for a few seconds here. What do you have to say?
Nobody else is speaking. Maybe I will. I'm muted because I'm in Canada actually, and we have a little bit of trouble with the United States right now, but I won't get into that. One of the things I've done a lot of canvassing because I used to be a municipal politician, so I've been to the door many, many times, and I know how much you learn from that. But I haven't actually done it with the church. I do run programs. We run a music program, a dinner program, a lunch program, and food drives and things of that nature. But we're one of these churches that, while we're in a growing area, our numbers are still going down. And we're not getting the children, even though there are lots in the neighborhood, and that's been a real issue with our parish council to make something happen there. But we're doing a few things outside of the church for the children, but very limited within the church. So I found it very interesting the way that you are talking about getting the community. This is something we've actually talked about and had some workshops on, is how we can get more involved in the community. We already have 83 units of social housing on our property because it's quite large. And that is helping a lot of people. We just rent the land to them. We get a bit of money that way, but they're completely self-sufficient to develop. And they are looking at doing some other things like that. So I'm going to be having a community meeting soon to start the dialogue on that before we do anything. One of the things I said, if you use the word community dialogues and you bring groups together as a group to talk about what the needs are in the community, and particularly for anything we might want to do on our church property, we have more than 10 acres, but a lot of part of it is the co-op and our large cemetery. And our church was built in 1839, and it's a heritage church, so we're limited to so we can do a bit there. But we still have other things that we could do there.
Wow, Mary Ann, I love, well, there's so many places to go with what you said. First of all, thank you for your service to your community and to your church. That is beautiful work. You're right that the kinds of canvassing that we can do, the questions we can ask are really important. And we don't often, I mean, evangelism is a scary word for church people, especially sort of in our Anglican approach to things. Yet asking questions doesn't mean you're trying to convert them. You're just trying to learn how we can serve you better in this neighborhood. We're members with you in this community, as you point out. How can we be co-workers in this work together? And the idea behind the economic halo effect is that, yes, it might attract new members, and we hope that it does, but it's also just great opportunity for you to provide service to your community. Your community needs you. We saw in those lifeline services that churches provide that if churches weren't there to do this work, what would the lives of people be like who are depending on church? So it's a great question to engage, and I really appreciate that you have some experience. You probably have some things to teach us about how to canvass and ask questions of people and approach those conversations. Often starting them is the hardest, but then once they get going, they're gone. So that's great. And then you remind us to bring it back into community for discernment. And that's so important. No ministry can be started unilaterally. We need the whole community to be excited and rally around it.
We had the co-op going ahead. We met with the neighbors and then that backed on the property and things as well as the church. And we had to actually persuade them this is an okay thing to do.
Right.
And in the end, because we did that before it was open or anything else. So at the end of that, for the zoning change, we had nobody objecting at all. And typically people object to zoning changes. And I think the dialogue matters a lot. I mostly ran municipally all the time. When I was a ward counselor, I would go to every single house over about a 7 or 8 month period, just to knock on the door and spend 10 or 20 seconds usually with them. It didn't matter if it was raining or 100 degrees or 20 below, which we get all that here. 30 below sometimes. Still got snow on the ground, but it's starting to melt. But it is something that pays off. I can remember people 2 years later coming up to me. I remember you coming to our house. It was 100 degrees. I couldn't believe you were still out there. And that's a very, very short little visit of less than a minute.
Yep.
So I can see, I can encourage people to do it. I always found knocking on doors, the first 2 or 3 doors were hard to get started. After that, it's slow. It really does. And I started from scratch when I first did it, but now even today, the first 3 or 4 are all hard.
Oh, yeah.
And please don't make us a 51st state. We do not want it. What Trump has done for us, believe it or not, it's pulled Canadians together. They're far more pulled together now than we were 6 months ago.
Well, I'm glad we could give you that, if nothing else.
Well, I just told you that earlier on. We're having discussions. We're not going to have negative ones. So I won't talk about him because it would be but there is a positive aspect.
Absolutely.
And almost everything negative has some positive aspects, even though what's happening now is unbelievable, if I can put it that way.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in the world.
Killing the hopes of every one of your best friends is effectively what he's trying to do.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in the world, which is a good reminder that our churches need to be stepping up.
Yeah.
And finding
and also what we also have been saying to our American friends, of which we have many, we've always been very close. We're not mad at you.
Yeah.
We're mad at a certain small group of people who are doing things that I don't even think you believe in either. And we all have to work together to get over it.
Right. We have to work together. That's a very important part.
And the same thing in the church and our community. We have to work together.
Marianne, thank you. That's so important. You said one more thing about having so much land and doing so much with it. There's a book that's come out recently called We Aren't Broke. I'll put it into the email that I send later. It's by Mark Elston. We Aren't Broke, and it's about how we reimagine our space, our land, these big parking lots we built in the 50s that aren't full of cars. What can we do with the assets that we have? And we remind ourselves that we actually have some. We have a lot of scarcity conversations these days, but actually we are rich in resources. And so you remind me of that. Thanks, Marianne. Debbie, you had your hand up, and then Jennifer. Debbie, come off mute for us. Not yet. There you go.
It helps to click in the right place.
It does.
I just want to thank you, Davey. You have given me a lot of energy this morning. I serve as the clerk of our vestry, and for the past year, we've been spinning our wheels around ideas that are laced all throughout your presentation this morning. And I just feel a new energy to take back to them, because we have been trying to get out into the community, and we have a huge outreach for our little parish, but we've got some ideas on the table, and some people have energy around it, but a lot of our old parishioners don't have energy about it. And I've just started being a stewardship chair last fall, so I'm kind of learning as I go. But we have a grant from the Diocese of Olympia called Transforming Communities. So we have a team that's starting to go out and talk about the things that you had in your presentation, getting to know the community, getting to know the needs. And then our rector also asked part of the vestry to go out and generate ideas for bringing revenue into the church. So they tend to come back after several months of looking at this as the very ideas you say of being a community resource place, inviting, like we have a senior service called Homage that could come in and talk about nutrition. We did a voter registration activity last fall. So they're brainstorming a lot of these ideas, but we're just having trouble getting resources and energy from other people to support it. So I have to sit and ponder on some of this stuff, but I'm really excited about it. We're having our vestry retreat next weekend. So I think I'm going to be bringing a lot of your ideas to the table, and I'm just so grateful. You bring something great to us every meeting we have. Thank you.
Debbie, thank you for that affirmation. That's a good feeling. Thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing. The ways that TENS can support you, let us know. Always happy to engage this conversation. And you're right. I think, this is discernment work for a congregation, but hopefully giving you some tools on how to collect the data and bring it back into conversation will help you. And when you go out there and start these new ministries, think about leveraging the business opportunities, the civic opportunities that are out there, and asking for some seed money. $500, $1,000 from a couple of businesses can be enough to get some momentum in your congregation. And convince some people that it's worth supporting if others are, nothing builds success like success. So get a good roll on that. That's great, Debbie. Thank you. Jennifer, your hand's up.
Yes, I wanted to ask Marianne a question. I wanted to know if when you went out for your short questioning, meeting the community, do you leave them anything, or is that too soon? Is your first interaction just you're being there? Or did you drop like a little?
Well, we haven't had the first meeting yet for this present one we're working on. We're working on some additional things to do with our land. And that was 20 years ago when we did the co-op. But I didn't at that point give them, when we had at the church itself, we had the co-op people come and they did give us some information that people needed to know. They're all worried about these drunken people that be coming and breaking into the church, and all these kind of things that people always raise, which are usually non-events. They don't exist, but anyway, they think they do. We have a mosque being built 2 doors from our church. They used to use our church for the prayers until they got too big. And when they were starting to get work on that one, some of the things I heard about which were racism, basically just terrible. I kind of react to people when they do those things, but it's really bad. Some people still think that, I don't want to have my kids out when I see those young men walking down the street, which is stupid. But but it's being built now. They've already in part of it, and they're having no problems at all. So it's just the people create problems all the time. So one of the things about a dialogue is to let them vent a little bit.
Yeah.
So tell us what they
But-
don't. And,
So when
then
you,
you turn that into a discussion about, well, what would work here? What are you needing in the community? I think the things you raised this morning about what the community needs. We don't have a lot of retail right around where we are. So maybe there is some, where the new zoning the city's putting into the area for churches includes medical centers. Maybe we could have a medical clinic there. I mean, these are the things, what are the things that people need? And even more housing types of things. And some of the people in our church want to make more money so they can pay for the bills in the church. And the whole church costs a lot to look after. I'm more
do.
interested in meeting our mission, which could include getting money, but it doesn't include giving everything over to a developer. They could do anything they want, which I'm not in favor of.
That's also true. Thanks, Marianne. Jennifer, your question was about a leave behind, right? Like, is there a,
I was wondering, like when you go door to door in your neighborhood and you're meeting people for the first time and you have those
Oh, yeah. In an
conversa-
election period, I leave them something. So I was running for election at the time I did that. It wasn't for the church. When I went around for the church, I did this with some of the new homes. We prepared a small pamphlet about the church because it's quite close to our church. A lot of them are Muslims going in there. It turned out 40 of them were from Turkey. It's interesting you find out things about the community. And we made a small brochure about the church saying what we're there for, and that they're welcome to come and walk in we have a labyrinth and walk our labyrinth at any time, or visit the driveway, but please no dogs. No, it was just a nice little introductory thing to give them. So
that's
if we do
beautiful.
another door knocking, that's what I think we do again.
Yeah, a little leave behind that describes who you are, something easy. I love that. Thank you, Marianne, and thanks, Jennifer, for that good question. Derwin, I think you're going to be our last question for the day.
Okay, well, thanks. I hope you can hear me.
I
I'm from
can.
the same diocese in Canada as Marianne, actually,
All right.
by coincidence. But I just thought I'd share something that we've done several times in our parish, which might be useful. We had, and other parishes may have done it as well, but we've done a number of times. We've simply done a very simple community consultation. We've identified the agencies in the parish area, whether they're youth, whether they're seniors, whether they're schools, whether they're immigrants, refugees, social housing, issues around food security, and so on and so forth. And we've simply identified those agencies. And then before COVID, we simply invited the representatives to a breakfast. And we served them breakfast. And we had them for an hour and a half. We seated them around tables. Each of the tables had a particular theme, whether it was children and youth or families or immigrants or whatever. They talked. They had one of our parish members was a facilitator, another was a note taker, and in an hour and a half, we gathered an enormous amount of information. And we wrote it up, and it gave us some leads as to how we might proceed further. With Zoom now, I think we can do that even better, because it doesn't involve physical movement, and that's an advantage. And it also means that we are not inviting others into our space, which for some people can be a difficulty. So just thought I'd share that. It's something we're planning to do in the near future.
I really, really like that idea. And whether it's in person and you offer breakfast, or virtual, or a combination of it, what a great time, like the momentum around an event that gathers that enthusiasm and all that information at once is really helpful. Because you get all this energy and then you get all these ideas. And if you're at a table sitting next to other people who are having an engaged conversation, you're listening, you're feeding off of each other.
That's right.
I love that. Derwin, what a good idea. Thanks for sharing it with us. We'll add
Well, it's
it.
very simple. And the other interesting thing, just by the way, was very interesting to observe at the end of the conversation, an hour's conversation, the number of business cards that were being exchanged by people at the same table who didn't know each other and didn't know that they were involved basically in the same issue. So it built a lot of community contacts. Anyway, thought I'd share.
Churches are nexuses for networking, for people connecting, for knowing each other. And if you can facilitate even that, more connection within your community, whether it results in ministry and membership, or whether it results in a stronger, more resilient community, all of that is part of God's work and a great role for church to take on. So sometimes we have to think even higher about our ministry opportunities than what we do in our own building, but how it's sustaining the world and connecting communities that need to be ever more resilient and adaptive and connected to each other. If that's a thing that church can provide, that's great. Good stuff. Friends, this has generated beautiful conversation and I'm really excited about it. This is a new webinar for us, and so I'm excited to hear your ideas. Gives me things to think about as we move forward in this ministry as well. So thank you. Thanks for participating. I will send this out to you probably by the end of the day, although I also have to do my taxes this afternoon, so it might not happen until tomorrow. But we will be gathering again on April the 12th, where we do the second part of this. We go a little more deep into understanding your ministry context, really looking at what the 2x2 model for engaging your community looks like and how we do that work together. So if you liked what we started in this, next April the 12th at 9 a.m. Pacific will be a follow-on conversation where we deepen this a little bit more. Won't talk so much about economic impact. We'll talk more about ministry solutions. But that's where we're going. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate the work you're doing for your church and for the world. Have a beautiful Saturday.